The notification email arrived at 2:47 a.m., like a message from another universe, and when Hallie Bunbury read it for the fourth time, she still couldn't quite believe that her 18-year-old daughter had just been selected to speak at the most prestigious business gala in the state. Hallie sat on the edge of their Murphy bed in the studio apartment that had been home for the past 3 years, watching Kiki sleep peacefully just a few feet away, completely unaware that her life was about to change forever. At 18, Kiki possessed the kind of natural brilliance that couldn't be taught, and the drive that came from watching your mother work herself to exhaustion just to keep food on the table. The irony wasn't lost on Hallie that her daughter, this magnificent young woman who'd built a profitable consulting business while maintaining a 4.0 GPA, had been invited to speak at an event hosted by Boer Industries, the same company owned by the man who'd walked out of their lives before Kiki was even born. Chad Boer. Even thinking his name after 18 years felt like touching a live wire. Hallie stood quietly and moved to their tiny kitchen, making coffee with the ancient machine that required percussive maintenance to function properly. Outside their single window, the city was beginning to wake up. Delivery trucks rumbling down streets, early commuters hurrying toward bus stops, the endless rhythm of people trying to build something better from whatever circumstances life had handed them. She'd been one of those people once, full of dreams and ambition and the naive belief that love could conquer any obstacle. That was before she'd learned that some obstacles were designed to be insurmountable, especially when you were 19 years old and pregnant with no money, no family support, and no idea how to fight an enemy with unlimited resources. "Mom!" Kiki's voice was soft but alert. She'd always been a light sleeper, probably from years of living in places where being aware of your surroundings was a survival skill. "Everything okay? You're up early even for you." Hallie turned to find her daughter sitting up in bed, her natural hair forming a beautiful crown around her face, eyes bright with the intelligence that had gotten her into college on a full academic scholarship despite every disadvantage the world had thrown at her. "I got an email about the Pinnacle Investment Gala," Hallie said, holding up her phone. "You've been selected as one of 5 young entrepreneurs to present to the investor panel." Kiki's eyes went wide, then narrow with the focused intensity she got when processing important information. "The Pinnacle Gala? That's huge, Mom. Those are the people who write checks with more zeros than most people see in a lifetime." "I know, baby. This could be exactly the opportunity you've been working toward." Kiki scrambled out of bed, suddenly fully awake and pacing their small space with the restless energy that always accompanied her biggest moments. "When is it? What do I need to prepare? How formal is the presentation? Do they want business plans or just pitches?" Watching her daughter's excitement, Hallie felt her heart swell with pride and break with terror simultaneously. This was Kiki's moment. The chance to step onto a stage where her brilliance could finally be recognized by people with the power to change her life. But it was also the moment when their carefully constructed world would collide with the past Hallie had spent 18 years trying to escape. "The gala is in 2 weeks, Hallie said, scrolling through the email details. 15-minute presentations followed by a networking reception. Black tie event at the Grand Meridian Ballroom. "Black tie?" Kiki repeated, her excitement dimming slightly as reality set in. "Mom, I don't exactly have black tie attire in my closet." Hallie looked at her daughter, this incredible young woman who could command a boardroom but worried about having the right dress for it, and felt the familiar surge of protectiveness that had sustained them both through 18 years of struggle. "We'll figure it out," Hallie said firmly. "We always do." But as Kiki dove into her laptop to research the other presenters and prepare her materials, Hallie found herself staring at the email header that listed the event host. Chad Boer, CEO, Boer Industries. 18 years, 7 months, and 12 days since she'd last seen him. Not that she was counting. The memories came flooding back despite her best efforts to keep them buried. Chad, at 22, brilliant and passionate, and completely convinced that love could overcome any obstacle his wealthy family might put in their way. The way he'd looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in any room, despite coming from a world where people like her were invisible unless they were serving coffee or cleaning offices. Their love affair had been a secret from his family, but never felt shameful, just precious. Something too beautiful and fragile to expose to people who wouldn't understand. They'd spent hours in the library studying together, Chad patiently explaining economic theories, while Hallie helped him see the human cost of policies that looked good on paper but devastated real communities. She'd been working 3 jobs even then, determined to earn her business degree despite having no family money to fall back on. Chad had never made her feel lesser for her circumstances. Instead, he'd seemed to admire her determination, often saying he learned more about real strength from watching her navigate a single day than he'd learned from a lifetime of privilege. When they'd first made love in his dorm room on a snow-covered February night, Hallie had felt like she was claiming something that belonged to her by right rather than by luck. Chad had been gentle and reverent, treating her body like something sacred, whispering promises about their future that had made her believe in fairy tales. "I'm going to marry you someday, Hallie Bunbury," he'd said afterward, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder while snow fell outside his window. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to work 3 jobs just to survive." For 8 months, she'd believed him. For 8 months, they'd been planning a future that seemed as inevitable as sunrise, graduation, his entry into the family business on his own terms, their wedding, the children they'd raised to be conscious of their privilege and committed to using it for good. Then she'd missed her period. The pregnancy test had shown positive on a Tuesday morning in March, just weeks before graduation. Hallie had stared at the little plus sign and felt terror and joy warring in her chest. They'd been careful, but not careful enough, and now their carefully planned future had been accelerated in ways that would test everything they thought they knew about love and commitment. She'd planned to tell Chad that evening after his economics final, had practiced the words a dozen different ways, imagining his face when she shared the news that would change both their lives forever. But she'd never gotten the chance. She'd woken up Thursday morning to find Chad gone. Not just absent from her bed, gone. His dorm room cleared out, his phone disconnected, his social media accounts deleted as if he'd never existed. The only trace he'd left behind was a note that said simply, "I'm sorry. My family has obligations I can't escape. Please forget me and build a beautiful life." 3 days later, men in expensive suits had appeared at her dorm room, lawyers representing the Borger family. They'd explained with cold professionalism. Their message had been simple and devastating. Chad was gone permanently. Any further contact would be considered harassment, and any claims regarding pregnancy or paternity would be met with legal action that would destroy whatever future she might hope to build. They'd known. Somehow, they'd known about the baby before she'd even had a chance to tell Chad. 19 years old, pregnant, and abandoned, Hallie had made the hardest decision of her life. She'd transferred her credits to a state school she could afford, moved back to her hometown, and disappeared into the anonymity of working-class life where millionaire families couldn't find her, even if they'd bothered to look. She'd raised Kike alone, working whatever jobs would pay the bills while pursuing her degree part-time. It had taken 6 years to graduate, but she'd done it, walking across the stage with her 2-year-old daughter clapping in the audience, both of them dressed in clothes from thrift stores, but radiating pride that no amount of money could buy. "Mom, you're staring into space again," Keke said, looking up from her laptop with concern. "Are you worried about something? Because if this is about money for a dress, we'll figure it out. Maybe I can pick up some extra tutoring sessions." "No," Hallie said quickly, forcing herself back to the present. "No, baby, don't worry about that. I'm just processing. This is a big opportunity." "The biggest," Keke agreed. then paused with the perceptiveness that had always made her seem older than her years. "But there's something else, isn't there? Something about this specific event that's bothering you." Hallie looked at her daughter, this brilliant, intuitive young woman who'd inherited her father's sharp mind and her mother's ability to read people, and felt the weight of 18 years of carefully maintained secrets. "The company hosting the gala," Hallie said carefully, "Bauer Industries. I knew someone who worked there a long time ago, before you were born." It wasn't a lie, technically. Chad had been destined for the family business, groomed from birth to take over the empire his grandfather had built. By now, he was probably exactly where his family had always planned for him to be, running the company, married to someone from the right social circle, living the life that had never had room for a working-class girl and her inconvenient pregnancy. "Someone you knew." Keiki's tone was curious but not suspicious. "Like a friend or—" "Someone I went to college with," Hallie said, which was also technically true. It was a long time ago, ancient history. But even as she spoke the words, Hallie knew there was nothing ancient about the way her heart had started racing the moment she'd seen Chad's name on that email. 18 years hadn't been long enough to forget the way he'd looked at her like she was his whole world, or the way it had felt to believe that love really could conquer any obstacle. 2 weeks from now, she'd be in the same room as Chad Bauer for the first time since the morning he'd disappeared from her life. He'd be watching from the audience as their daughter, the child he'd never known existed, stepped onto a stage and proved that love, even abandoned and betrayed, could still create something magnificent. The irony was almost poetic. Chad had built his empire, achieved everything his family had demanded of him, become exactly the success story they'd envisioned. And Hallie had built something even more valuable. She'd raised a daughter who would soon command the attention of everyone in that ballroom, including the father who'd never known she existed. "I'm proud of you, baby," Hallie said, crossing to where Keiki sat surrounded by business plans and market projections. "Whatever happens at this gala, whatever opportunities come or don't come, I want you to know that you've already accomplished something extraordinary. You've built success on your own terms, with your own mind and your own determination." "We built it," Keiki corrected, looking up at her mother with eyes that held depths of understanding far beyond her 18 years. "Everything I am, everything I've accomplished. It's because you sacrificed everything to give me the foundation to succeed. This opportunity, this moment, it belongs to both of us." As they spent the rest of the morning planning Keiki's presentation and researching the other entrepreneurs who'd be speaking, Hallie tried to focus on her daughter's excitement rather than her own growing anxiety. But she couldn't shake the feeling that their carefully constructed life was about to be upended in ways she couldn't predict or control. In 2 weeks, the past would finally catch up with the present. In 2 weeks, Chad Bauer would discover that the greatest love of his life had given him the greatest gift he'd never known he'd received. And in 2 weeks, Hallie would have to decide whether 18 years of hurt and abandonment could ever be forgiven, or whether some betrayals were too deep to heal, even when faced with the undeniable proof that their love had created something beautiful despite being destroyed before it could flourish. The countdown to reckoning had begun, and for the first time in 18 years, Hallie Bunbury had no idea how her story would end. Chapter 2. The Millionaire's Regret. Chad Bauer stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, 40 floors above a city that had watched him build an empire from nothing and felt the familiar emptiness that no amount of success had ever managed to fill. At 40 years old, he was everything his family had groomed him to become and nothing he'd ever wanted to be. The Bauer Industries logo gleamed in gold letters across the building's facade, representing 3 generations of wealth and influence that had finally fallen into his capable but reluctant hands. Business magazines called him a visionary, financial analysts praised his innovative approaches to sustainable development, and politicians courted his endorsements with embarrassing desperation. None of it mattered without her. 18 years, 7 months, and 12 days since he'd made the worst decision of his life. Not a morning passed that Chad didn't wake up reaching for Hallie Bunbury's warmth beside him, only to find expensive sheets that felt cold despite thread counts most people couldn't afford. Not a business triumph felt complete without imagining how her brilliant mind would have improved his strategies. Not a sunset painted the sky without him remembering how she used to watch the light fade from his dorm room window, her head against his shoulder, planning a future they'd never gotten to share. Mr. Borger. Dario Cromwell's voice cut through his melancholy, followed by the distinctive click of Italian leather shoes against polished marble. Dario had been his executive assistant for 7 years, long enough to recognize when his boss was lost in memories that couldn't be shared with quarterly reports or board meetings. The final details for the Pinnacle Gala, Dario continued, approaching with a leather portfolio that contained the culmination of months of planning. 5 exceptional young entrepreneurs selected from over 300 applicants. Their presentations should be quite impressive. Chad accepted the portfolio without turning from the window, his reflection ghost-like against the afternoon sky. The Pinnacle Investment Gala had been his idea, an annual event designed to identify and fund the next generation of business innovators. It was good for the company's image, excellent for discovering investment opportunities, and served as a convenient distraction from the hollowness that success hadn't been able to cure. The youngest presenter is particularly noteworthy, Dario added, something in his tone suggesting professional admiration mixed with genuine surprise. 18 years old, already generating 6-figure annual revenue from her consulting firm while maintaining perfect grades in her business program. Her client testimonials are extraordinary. Chad finally turned from the window, drawn by the enthusiasm in his assistant's voice. In 7 years of working together, Dario had developed an excellent eye for genuine talent versus well-connected mediocrity. If he was impressed, the young entrepreneur was probably worth attention. "What's her background?" Chad asked, settling behind his desk and opening the portfolio to scan the presenter profiles. First-generation college student, raised by a single mother. Built her business from nothing while working multiple part-time jobs, Dario recited from memory. Her approach to community-focused consulting has attracted clients from non-profit organizations to mid-sized corporations. She's particularly talented at helping underserved businesses access markets they've never been able to penetrate. Chad felt a flutter of recognition, though he couldn't place why. The description reminded him of conversations he'd had years ago with someone who'd understood the human cost of business decisions in ways his privileged classmates never had. Someone who'd challenged him to think beyond profit margins to actual impact on real communities. "Her name?" Chad asked, flipping through the portfolio to find the detailed presenter information. "Kiki Bunbury." The portfolio slipped from Chad's hands, sending papers scattering across his desk like fallen leaves. Bunbury. That name had haunted his dreams for 18 years, whispered in moments of weakness when he allowed himself to wonder what had become of the only woman he'd ever loved. But Kiki. Who was Kiki? "Sir?" Dario stepped forward, concern evident in his expression. "Are you all right?" Chad's mind was racing, calculating dates and possibilities with the precision that had made him millions. 18 years ago, he'd left Hallie Bunbury heartbroken and alone, believing he was protecting her from his family's cruelty, if she'd had a child after he left. The timeline was impossible. Kiki was 18, which meant she'd been born the year after he'd disappeared from Hallie's life. Unless... "Find me everything," Chad said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything about Kiki Bunbury, her background, her family, her entire academic and business history. I want it comprehensive, and I want it confidential. Sir, if I may ask, please, Dario, it's important. Alone again, Chad gathered the scattered papers with hands that trembled slightly, studying the brief biographical information included in the gala materials. Born April 15th, 18 years ago. Raised in the state capital by her mother, academic scholarship recipient. No mention of a father. April 15th. Chad did the math twice, then a third time, his heart racing as the implications became clear. If Kike had been born in April, she would have been conceived in July, just 1 month before he disappeared from Halle's life. The room spun around him as 18 years of suppressed emotion crashed over him like a tsunami. Not only had he abandoned the woman he loved, he'd potentially abandoned his own child. A daughter who'd grown up without a father while he'd built an empire from the guilt and grief of losing everything that mattered. Chad's phone buzzed with a text from his current fiancée, Amara St. James, reminding him about dinner with her parents that evening. The engagement had been announced 6 months ago, a merger of two powerful families that made perfect sense on paper and felt like wearing someone else's clothes. Amara was beautiful, accomplished, and utterly lacking in anything that resembled the fire that had made him fall in love with Halle. He deleted the text without responding. The memories flooded back despite his best efforts to maintain professional composure. Halle, at 19, brilliant and passionate and completely unimpressed by his family's wealth. She'd worked 3 jobs to pay for college, but still found time to tutor struggling students for free, because education, she'd insisted, was the only thing that could level an uneven playing field. When she'd looked at him, she'd seen past the money and the name to something worthy of love. In her eyes, he'd glimpsed the man he wanted to become, someone who used his advantages to lift others up rather than consolidate more power for himself. Their love affair had been conducted in library study rooms and off-campus coffee shops, away from the scrutiny of classmates who would have reduced their relationship to speculation about Halle's motives. But in private, they'd built something beautiful, a connection based on genuine admiration, shared values, and the kind of passionate discussions that had made Chad believe he could actually change the world. He'd been planning to propose after graduation, had actually bought a ring, something simple and elegant that matched Halle's natural beauty rather than competing with it. He'd imagined their wedding, their life together, the children they'd raised, to be conscious of their privilege and committed to using it responsibly. Then his father had called him home 3 weeks before graduation. Charles Boher Sr. had been waiting in the family study, surrounded by photos of 3 generations of Boer men who'd built their fortune on the principle that emotion was weakness and love was a luxury the wealthy couldn't afford. On his desk had been a stack of photographs, Chad and Halle sharing coffee, holding hands, stealing kisses between classes. "You will end this immediately," his father had said without preamble, his voice carrying the cold authority that had built an empire. "Tonight, you will pack your belongings, transfer to graduate school in London, and never contact this girl again." "I won't do it," Chad had replied, 22 years old and foolish enough to believe love could defeat money and power. "I'm going to marry her." His father had smiled then, the expression of a predator who'd been anticipating this conversation for months. "Then you'll destroy her. I've had Miss Bunbury investigated thoroughly. Her family's financial situation is precarious. Medical bills for her chronically ill grandmother, student loans that exceed her family's annual income, employment that can be terminated with a single phone call from the right person." Chad had stared at his father in growing horror, finally understanding the depths of the man's ruthlessness. "One word from me," his father had continued, "and Miss Bunbury loses her scholarships, her jobs, and any hope of finishing her education. Her family loses their home, her grandmother loses her medical care, and your infatuation destroys the lives of everyone she loves. Is your teenage romance worth that much suffering? Trapped between love and terror, between his own happiness and Hallie's future, Chad had made the choice that had haunted him ever since. He'd written a cowardly note, packed his belongings while she slept trustingly beside him, and disappeared from her life like a ghost. He'd planned to return once he was older, stronger, more capable of protecting the people he loved from his family's influence. But by the time he'd gained independence and built his own power base, Hallie Bunbury had vanished without a trace. No forwarding address, no social media presence, no digital footprint that his expensive private investigators could follow. Now, 18 years later, a young woman with her surname was about to speak at his gala. A young woman whose age and birthday suggested she might be the daughter he'd never known existed. Dario returned an hour later with a thick file and the expression of someone who'd uncovered secrets too painful to share easily. Ms. Bunbury's academic records are exemplary, Dario began carefully. Full scholarship recipient, Dean's List every semester, already accepted to several graduate programs despite being only 18. Her business acumen is remarkable. She's generated over $200,000 in revenue this year alone. What about her family? Chad asked, though he dreaded the answer. Raised by her mother, Hallie Bunbury, currently 37 years old, no father listed on any official documents. They've moved frequently over the years, always staying within state boundaries, but never in one place for more than a few years until recently. Chad felt his heart clench. Hallie had been running, staying one step ahead of anyone who might try to find them. She'd spent 18 years protecting their daughter from the very family that had torn them apart. Ms. Bunbury, the mother, works multiple jobs, Dario continued. Currently employed at Morrison's Diner, Crystal Clear Cleaning Services, and as a tutor through the adult education program. Financial records suggest they live paycheck to paycheck despite the daughter's business success. The guilt hit Chad like a physical blow. While he'd been building his empire and enjoying the privileges of wealth, the woman he'd loved had been working herself to exhaustion to provide for their child. Every sacrifice Hallie had made, every struggle they'd endured could have been avoided if he'd been brave enough to fight his father 18 years ago. There's more, Dario said quietly. Recent photographs of the young woman show a striking resemblance to, well, to you, sir. The bone structure, the eye color, certain mannerisms that are quite distinctive. Chad's hands shook as he opened the file to find surveillance photos taken at Kike's university. Even in candid shots, her confidence and natural leadership were evident. But more than that, she looked like him, not obviously, but in subtle ways that would be unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. She was his daughter. He was certain of it with every fiber of his being. Sir, Dario said carefully, what would you like me to do with this information? Chad stared at the photographs of the daughter he'd never known existed, feeling 18 years of suppressed grief and love threatening to overwhelm him completely. In 2 weeks, she would stand on his stage and speak to his investors about her business success, completely unaware that her father would be watching from the audience. Nothing, Chad said finally. We do nothing. We let her have her moment, and we watch her succeed on her own merits. And afterward? Chad looked out the window at the city below, thinking of a 19-year-old girl who'd trusted him with her heart and received abandonment in return. Thinking of a daughter who'd grown up believing her father hadn't wanted her, when the truth was that he'd loved her mother too much to stay and too little to fight. Afterward, Chad said quietly, I figure out how to earn the right to be part of their lives again. For the first time in 18 years, Chad Boer felt something more powerful than regret coursing through his veins. He felt hope, terrifying and magnificent, that love might be strong enough to bridge even the chasm he'd created with his cowardice. In 2 weeks, he would see Hallie again. In 2 weeks, he would meet the daughter who carried his DNA, but had been shaped entirely by her mother's strength. In 2 weeks, he would discover whether some mistakes were too big to forgive, or whether family could be rebuilt from the ashes of old betrayals. The countdown to the most important moment of his life had begun. Chapter 3. Preparing for battle. 2 weeks had never felt so long or so short simultaneously, and as Hallie Bunbury stood in the thrift store changing room, holding up a black dress that might, with significant alterations, be appropriate for the most important night of her daughter's life, she wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her past 18 years. The dress was beautiful in a timeless way, classic lines that wouldn't embarrass Keke in a room full of millionaires, but it would require work to fit properly. Hallie had become skilled at alterations over the years, transforming second-hand finds into something that looked intentional rather than desperate. Tonight's outfit for herself was less important than making sure Keke had everything she needed to command that stage with confidence. "Mom, did you find anything?" Keke called from the next changing room, her voice slightly muffled by fabric. "Maybe," Hallie replied, studying her reflection critically. At 37, she still turned heads when she walked into a room, but 18 years of working multiple jobs had left their mark. Fine lines around her eyes, from squinting under fluorescent lights, hands that were strong but showed the wear of physical labor, a wariness in her posture that came from never quite feeling safe or settled. Still, she cleaned up well, and for one night, one crucial night, she needed to look like she belonged in Chad Boer's world, even if every instinct screamed that she was an imposter who would be exposed the moment she opened her mouth. "I think I found something perfect," Keke said, emerging from her changing room in a simple black dress that transformed her from college student to sophisticated young professional. The dress was elegant without being flashy, age-appropriate but authoritative, exactly what a rising entrepreneur should wear to address a room full of potential investors. Hallie felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at her daughter. "Baby, you look incredible, professional and confident, and absolutely beautiful." "You think so?" Keke turned to examine herself in the store's three-way mirror, and Hallie saw the same blend of excitement and nervousness that had characterized all of Keke's major milestones. "I want them to take me seriously, not see me as some kid playing dress-up in the adult world. Anyone who doesn't take you seriously after hearing you speak for 5 minutes is an idiot who doesn't deserve your time or attention," Hallie said firmly. "You've earned this opportunity through your own merit, your own hard work, your own brilliant mind. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." As they paid for their dresses, carefully budgeted purchases that would require eating ramen for the next 2 weeks, but were absolutely worth it, Hallie tried to ignore the growing anxiety that had been building since the moment she'd seen Chad's name on that email. 18 years was a long time. He might not even recognize her. He certainly wouldn't expect to see her at his gala, and even if he did spot her in the crowd, there was no reason to think he'd make any connection to Keke. After all, he had no idea she'd been pregnant when he left. But as they rode the bus home, Keke chattering excitedly about her presentation strategy and the research she'd done on the other speakers, Hallie couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap she couldn't see coming. "Have you thought about what you'll do if this goes really well?" Hallie asked as they climbed the stairs to their 4th-floor apartment. "If you get investors interested, if opportunities start opening up that might change everything." Keke paused at their door, key in hand, and gave her mother a look that was both mature beyond her years and still heartbreakingly young. "You mean, have I thought about leaving you behind when I get successful?" "That's not what I meant." "Yes, it is," Keke said gently, pushing open their door and leading them into the small space that had been home for the past 3 years. "Mom, you've spent my entire life sacrificing your own dreams so I could chase mine. But success isn't worth having if it means abandoning the person who made it possible." Hallie sank onto their second-hand couch, overwhelmed by the fierce loyalty in her daughter's voice. "Baby, I don't want to hold you back. If opportunities come up that require you to move or travel or—" "Then we'll figure it out together," Kiki said firmly, settling beside her mother, "the way we always have. I'm not going anywhere without you, Mom. You're my family, my anchor, my best friend. Whatever comes next, we face it together." The words should have been comforting, but instead they made Hallie's anxiety spike even higher. Because in less than a week they would be walking into a room where Chad Borer would see Kiki for the first time. And if he noticed the resemblance, if he started asking questions, if he put together the timeline, their carefully constructed life could fall apart in an instant. "There's something I need to tell you," Hallie said suddenly, then immediately regretted the impulse. But Kiki was looking at her with such trust, such complete faith, that her mother would always protect her, and the weight of 18 years of secrets felt suddenly unbearable. "What is it?" Kiki asked, concern creeping into her voice. Hallie looked at her daughter, this brilliant, accomplished young woman who had every right to know the truth about her father, and felt the familiar war between protection and honesty that had defined her parenting for 18 years. "The man who owns Boer Industries," Hallie said carefully. "Chad Boer. I knew him in college. We were close." Kiki's eyes widened with understanding. "How close?" "Very close. For about 8 months we were in love. I thought we were going to get married after graduation." "What happened?" Hallie chose her words carefully, sticking to the version of events that wouldn't destroy Kiki's faith in love or relationships. "His family didn't approve of me. I wasn't from their world, didn't have the right background or connections. The pressure became too much, and he chose his family's expectations over our relationship. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. Chad had chosen his family's demands, even if the choice had been made under duress. So when you see him at the gala," Kiki said slowly, processing the implications. "It might be awkward," Hallie admitted, "seeing someone who broke your heart, especially in a setting where he has all the power and success. But I won't let that interfere with your moment. This is about you, about your achievements, about your future." Kiki was quiet for a long moment, her brilliant mind working through details and possibilities that Hallie couldn't predict. "Do you think he'll recognize you?" Kiki asked finally. "Maybe. Probably. But it was 18 years ago, and we're both very different people now. Whatever history we had, it's ancient and irrelevant to why we'll be there." Another lie, or at least a massive understatement. But Kiki seemed to accept it, nodding thoughtfully before returning to her laptop and the presentation she'd been perfecting for 2 weeks. Meanwhile, 20 miles across the city, Chad Boer sat in his penthouse office, staring at surveillance photos of his potential daughter, wrestling with his own impossible decisions. He'd spent the past 2 weeks having Kiki's background investigated as thoroughly as possible without crossing legal or ethical lines. Every piece of information confirmed what his heart already knew. This brilliant young woman was his child, raised by the woman he'd never stopped loving, shaped by struggles he should have helped shoulder. The temptation to reach out was overwhelming. To call Hallie, to arrange a meeting, to try to explain 18 years of absence and regret. But every scenario he imagined ended in disaster. Hallie hanging up on him, Keke rejecting him before he had a chance to prove he'd changed. The media turning their reunion into a spectacle that would overshadow Keke's achievements. Better to wait. Better to let Keke have her moment at the gala, to see her succeed on her own terms, and then, maybe, find a way to slowly, carefully, become part of their lives again. "Sir?" Dario appeared in his doorway with the expression he wore when delivering news that might be unwelcome. Ms. St. James is here to see you. She says it's about the final arrangements for Saturday's gala. Chad suppressed a sigh. Amara had been increasingly demanding about their relationship lately, probably sensing his emotional distance and trying to force a deeper connection that simply didn't exist. The last thing he needed was to navigate her expectations while his mind was consumed with thoughts of seeing Hallie again. "Send her in," Chad said, quickly closing the file on his desk and trying to summon the energy to play the role of devoted fiancé. Amara St. James swept into his office like she owned it, her designer dress and perfect makeup creating an image of controlled elegance that photographed beautifully for society pages but felt cold in person. She was everything his family had wanted for him: beautiful, connected, ambitious in ways that complemented rather than competed with his own success. She was also everything that Hallie wasn't, which had probably been the point when his father had orchestrated their introduction 5 years ago. "Darling," Amara said, crossing to kiss his cheek with the careful precision of someone who never wanted to disturb her lipstick. "I wanted to discuss the seating arrangements for Saturday. I think it would be best if I'm positioned prominently enough for the photographers to capture us together during the presentations." "The gala isn't about us," Chad said, his patience already wearing thin. "It's about showcasing young entrepreneurs and connecting them with potential investors." "Of course," Amara agreed smoothly. "But it's also an opportunity to reinforce our partnership, both personal and professional. My family's foundation is contributing significantly to the evening's success." Chad nodded absently, his mind already drifting back to the question that had consumed him for 2 weeks. What would he say to Hallie when he saw her? How do you apologize for 18 years of absence? How do you explain choices that seemed impossible to defend, even to yourself? "You seem distracted," Amara observed, settling into the chair across from his desk with predatory grace. "Is there something about the gala that's concerning you?" "Just the usual pre-event logistics," Chad lied, focusing on her face with effort, "making sure everything runs smoothly for the speakers. Speaking of which, I've reviewed the presenter list. Quite impressive, though I have to say I'm surprised by the inclusion of such a young speaker. 18 seems rather inexperienced for an event of this caliber." Chad felt a flash of protective anger that he carefully suppressed. Kiki Bunbury has achieved more at 18 than most people accomplish in a lifetime. Her business acumen is extraordinary. "I'm sure it is," Amara said with the tone of someone who didn't believe what she was saying. "I just hope the audience will take her seriously. Sometimes youth can be dismissed, regardless of merit." The casual dismissal of his daughter's achievements made Chad's jaw clench, but he forced himself to remain professional. "I have complete confidence in all of our speakers. The selection committee chose them based on accomplishment, not age." As Amara continued discussing logistics and social positioning, Chad found himself counting down the hours until Saturday night. 72 hours until he would see Hallie again. 72 hours until he would watch his daughter command a room full of powerful people who would have no choice but to recognize her brilliance. 72 hours until he discovered whether love could survive 18 years of silence or whether some betrayals were too deep to forgive. The countdown to the most important night of his life had begun, and Chad Boer had never felt more terrified or more hopeful about what the future might hold. Chapter 4. Worlds about to collide. The morning of the Pinnacle Investment Gala dawned grey and drizzling, as if the weather itself was reflecting the anxiety that had kept Hallie Bunbury awake for most of the night, staring at the ceiling and trying to prepare herself for seeing Chad Boer again after 18 years of silence. She stood at their apartment's single window, watching early commuters hurry through the rain with umbrellas and purpose, everyone heading toward their own version of an important day. None of them knew that in a few hours her carefully constructed world might collapse completely, depending on whether the man who'd abandoned her could do basic math and recognize the implications of their daughter's age. "Mom?" "You're doing that thing again," Keiki said from the kitchen, where she was making coffee with their temperamental machine. "That staring into space thing you've been doing all week. Are you okay?" Hallie turned to find her daughter watching her with concern, already dressed in jeans and a sweater, but radiating the kind of nervous energy that preceded all of Kiki's biggest moments. At 18, she possessed the rare combination of youthful enthusiasm and mature confidence that made her magnetic to everyone she met. "Just thinking about tonight," Hallie said, which was true enough. "Making sure we haven't forgotten anything important. I've got my presentation memorized, my backup slides loaded on 3 different devices, and my business cards printed on the good paper," Kiki said, ticking off items on her mental checklist. "What else could we possibly need?" "Courage," Hallie thought. "The strength to face the past without letting it destroy the future we've built." "You're going to be incredible tonight," Hallie said instead, crossing to the kitchen to accept the coffee Kiki offered. "Those investors have no idea what's about to hit them." "I hope so. This could change everything for us, Mom. If even one of them decides to take a chance on my business." Keike's voice trailed off, but her eyes were bright with possibilities that extended far beyond their current circumstances. Hallie felt the familiar flutter of pride mixed with terror that had defined her parenting for 18 years. She wanted Kiki to succeed beyond her wildest dreams, but success brought visibility, and visibility brought questions that Hallie wasn't sure she was ready to answer. "Whatever happens tonight," Hallie said carefully, "I want you to remember that you've already accomplished something extraordinary. You built a business from nothing, earned respect from clients twice your age, and created opportunities that didn't exist before you imagined them into being." "We built it," Kiki corrected automatically, the same response she'd been giving since childhood whenever Hallie tried to take herself out of the equation. "Everything I am is because of everything you sacrificed to get me here." The words should have been comforting, but they only made Hallie's anxiety worse, because tonight, for the first time in 18 years, Kiki would be in the same room as her father. And if Chad had even half the intelligence Hallie remembered, he would take one look at their daughter and know exactly what he'd been missing. Meanwhile, across the city, Chad Bauer stood in his master bathroom, staring at his reflection in the mirror and trying to convince himself that he wasn't about to make the second biggest mistake of his life. The first mistake had been leaving 18 years ago. The second might be staying in the shadows tonight when every instinct screamed at him to approach Hallie and Kiki directly, to explain everything, to fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness he didn't deserve but desperately needed. But the rational part of his mind, the part that had built a business empire from calculated risks and careful timing, knew that tonight belonged to Kiki. Whatever reckoning awaited him and Hallie would have to wait until their daughter had her moment to shine without the complications of family drama overshadowing her achievements. "Sir?" Dario's voice came through the intercom system that connected Chad's penthouse to his office 30 floors below. "The final security briefing for tonight's event is ready for your review." "I'll be down in 10 minutes, Chad replied, straightening his tie with hands that were steadier than he felt. Today would require every ounce of professional composure he possessed, because tonight he would be playing host while his heart was breaking and healing simultaneously. The elevator ride to his office felt endless, each floor another step closer to the moment when past and present would finally collide. Chad had spent 18 years wondering what had become of Hallie Bunbury, but he'd never imagined she'd been raising his child just 20 miles away, struggling to provide opportunities he could have given them both without thinking twice. Dario reported as Chad entered his office, "The venue is secure, all invited guests have been confirmed, and the media credentials have been finalized. The only last-minute change is that we've had to increase security slightly due to some additional press interest." "What kind of press interest?" Chad asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Business journals primarily, but also some lifestyle publications interested in the philanthropic angle. Nothing that should interfere with the presentations, but enough attention to make the evening notable. Chad nodded, trying to focus on logistics instead of the emotional earthquake that awaited him in just a few hours. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spent years trying to use his wealth and influence to find Hallie, only to discover that she would come to him of her own accord, drawn by their daughter's success, rather than any desire to reconnect with the man who'd broken her heart. "There's one more thing," Dario said carefully. "The youngest presenter, Kiki Bunbury, her background check revealed some interesting details about her family situation." Chad's blood turned to ice. "What kind of details?" "Nothing inappropriate for our purposes," Dario assured him quickly. "But her mother's employment history shows a pattern of instability. Multiple jobs, frequent address changes, no significant romantic relationships documented. It suggests someone who's been cautious about putting down roots. Or someone who's been running," Chad thought with growing certainty. "Someone who's been protecting herself and her daughter from exactly the kind of investigation that just uncovered those details. Sir, are you certain you don't want me to arrange a private meeting before the gala? If there are personal connections that might make the evening complicated—" "No," Chad said firmly. "Tonight is about the presenters and their achievements. Whatever personal history exists, it doesn't interfere with their professional opportunities." But even as he spoke the words, Chad knew he was lying to himself. The moment he saw Kiki step onto that stage, the moment he looked into eyes that mirrored his own, professional detachment would become impossible. He was about to meet his daughter for the first time, and the magnitude of that moment was already threatening to overwhelm him completely. The rest of the day passed in a blur of final preparations and mounting tension. Chad reviewed security protocols, approved last-minute catering changes, and tried to maintain his usual pre-event composure while his mind raced with 18 years' worth of questions and regrets. At 4 o'clock, as he was reviewing the evening's program for the final time, his phone rang with a call from Amara. "Darling, I'll meet you at the venue," she said without preamble. "I'm running late due to a hair appointment that took longer than expected." "That's fine," Chad replied, relieved to have one less complication to manage during the pre-event setup. "I'll see you there." "Chad?" Amara's voice carried a note of something that might have been concern or curiosity. "You've seemed distant lately, distracted. I hope whatever's bothering you won't interfere with tonight's success." "Nothing will interfere with tonight," Chad said with more conviction than he felt. "The presenters deserve our complete attention and support." As he ended the call and prepared to leave for the venue, Chad caught sight of his reflection in his office window, 40 years old, successful beyond his younger self's wildest dreams, and about to face the consequences of the choice that had defined the last 18 years of his life. At the same time, Hallie was helping Kiki with last-minute presentation practice in their small apartment, trying to project confidence while her heart raced with anticipation and dread. "Remember to pause after your opening statement," Hallie coached, watching her daughter practice her posture and projection. "Let them absorb what you're saying instead of rushing to the next point." "Got it," Kiki said, running through her key transitions one more time. "Mum, what if they don't take me seriously? What if they see my age and assume I'm not ready for real investment?" "Then they're idiots who don't deserve to be part of your success," Hallie said fiercely. "But that won't happen, because you're going to walk into that room like you own it, speak with the authority that comes from real accomplishment, and remind everyone present that brilliance doesn't have an expiration date." Kiki smiled, some of her nervous energy transforming into excitement. "I can't believe this is really happening. 6 months ago, I was tutoring classmates for pizza money. Tonight, I'm presenting to some of the most powerful investors in the state." And you earned every bit of it, Hallie said, though the words felt hollow given what she knew about who would be in that audience. Are you ready to get dressed? As they began the careful process of transforming themselves for the most important evening of Keke's young life, neither mother nor daughter could have imagined how completely their world was about to change. In just a few hours, 18 years of secrets would begin to unravel. 3 lives would collide with the force of suppressed love and regret, and a family that had never known it existed would finally have the chance to heal or destroy each other completely. The countdown to revelation had reached its final hours, and somewhere across the city, Chad Boer was making the same transformation, preparing to face the woman he'd never stopped loving and meet the daughter whose existence would either redeem his past mistakes or prove that some betrayals were too deep to forgive. Tonight, everything would change. The only question was whether any of them would survive the transformation. Chapter 5. The Lavish Investor Gala. The Grand Meridian Ballroom had been transformed into a temple of ambition and possibility, where crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors, and every surface gleamed with the kind of perfection that unlimited budgets could achieve. Hallie Bunbury stood at the entrance beside her daughter, feeling like an actress who'd wandered onto the wrong movie set, watching titans of industry glide through conversations that could reshape entire markets with handshake agreements over champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "This is insane," Kiki whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the opulence surrounding them. "Mom, look at this place. Look at these people. I feel like I'm about to present my lemonade stand business plan to the gods of capitalism." "You belong here," Hallie said firmly, though her own confidence wavered as she watched women in designer gowns that cost more than her annual salary laugh at jokes she couldn't hear from men whose casual conversations involved numbers that made her head spin. "Your ideas, your accomplishments, your vision. You've earned the right to be in this room." Kike wore the black dress they'd found at the thrift store, altered by Hallie's careful hands to fit perfectly, paired with shoes borrowed from her college roommate and jewelry that had belonged to Hallie's grandmother. She looked elegant and professional, but more importantly, she looked like herself, confident without arrogance, ambitious without ruthlessness, brilliant without pretension. Hallie had chosen her own outfit with equal care, the navy dress that emphasized her still impressive figure while maintaining professional dignity. At 37, she could still turn heads when she walked into a room, but tonight she was armor-clad in composure, determined to support her daughter without becoming a distraction. "Ms. Bunbury!" A cheerful voice cut through the gentle din of networking conversations, and they turned to see Lumira Bardot approaching with the kind of practiced smile that managed complex events with grace under pressure. "And the wonderful Keke. You both look absolutely stunning tonight." "Thank you," Hallie managed, grateful for a familiar face in the sea of strangers. "Everything looks incredible. You've created something magical here." "Well, Mr. Boer spares no expense when it comes to supporting young entrepreneurs," Lumira said, her eyes twinkling with professional pride. "He's particularly excited about tonight's presentations. I don't think I've ever seen him this invested in the success of our speakers." Kiki's hand found Hallie's, squeezing tight enough to leave marks. "Is he here already, Mr. Boer, I mean?" "Oh yes, he arrived early to handle last-minute details. I believe he's near the bar, speaking with some of our major donors." Lumira checked her tablet with efficient precision. "You're scheduled to present forth, which gives you time to network and get comfortable with the atmosphere. The green room is available if you need a quiet moment to prepare." As Lumira moved away to manage other aspects of the evening, Hallie felt the weight of inevitability settling around them like a shroud. Somewhere in this glittering crowd, Chad Borger was making conversation and playing the perfect host, completely unaware that his past was about to walk directly into his present. "There are so many people here," Keke said, her voice slightly overwhelmed as she took in the scope of the gathering. I researched the guest list, but seeing them all in person, these are people who make decisions that affect entire industries. And tonight, you're going to be one of them, Hallie said, though her attention was involuntarily scanning the crowd for a face she hadn't seen in 18 years but would recognize instantly. They moved deeper into the ballroom, Keke gradually relaxing as she engaged in conversations with other young entrepreneurs and curious investors. Watching her daughter navigate these interactions with natural charisma and genuine passion for her work, Hallie felt her heart swell with pride that temporarily overwhelmed her anxiety. This was what all those years of sacrifice had been building toward, this moment when Kiki could stand among the most powerful people in the business world and hold her own through merit rather than connections, through brilliance rather than privilege. Ms. Bunbury. An unfamiliar voice made Hallie turn to find an elegant woman in her early 30s, approaching with the kind of predatory grace that suggested money and influence. I'm Amara Street, James. I don't believe we've been introduced. Hallie accepted the offered handshake, noting the engagement ring that probably cost more than most people's cars and the way Amara's eyes assessed her with calculating precision. I'm here with my daughter, Hallie said carefully, unsure why this woman had sought her out specifically. She's one of tonight's presenters. Yes, the young entrepreneur. How interesting. Amara's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her expression. I have to say, I'm impressed by the diversity of tonight's speakers. It's so important to give opportunities to unusual circumstances. The casual condescension made Hallie's protective instincts flare, but before she could respond, Amara continued with silky smoothness. I'm engaged to Chad Borger, actually. Perhaps you know him. Though I suppose your paths wouldn't naturally cross, given the different spheres you move in. The words hit Hallie like a physical blow. Chad was engaged. Of course he was. Successful, wealthy, attractive men didn't stay single for 18 years. But hearing it confirmed, seeing the ring on this woman's finger, made something twist painfully in Hallie's chest. Congratulations, Hallie managed, her voice steadier than she felt. I hope you'll both be very happy. Oh, we will be, Amara said with supreme confidence. Chad and I are perfectly suited. Same background, same social circle, same vision for our future together. It's so important to be with someone who truly understands your world, don't you think? Before Hallie could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much, Kiki appeared at her side with flushed cheeks and bright eyes. Mom, I just met the most amazing woman who runs a non-profit focused on micro-lending in underserved communities, Kiki said excitedly. She wants to discuss a potential partnership that could... She stopped mid-sentence as she noticed Amara. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Not at all, Amara said, her attention shifting to Keke with renewed interest. You must be the young presenter everyone's talking about. How exciting for you to have this opportunity. Something in Amara's tone made Hallie step closer to her daughter, an unconscious protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. Thank you, Kiki said politely. I'm grateful for the chance to share my work with such an impressive audience. I'm sure you are, Amara replied, her gaze moving between Kiki and Hallie with calculating assessment. Family businesses can be so personal, can't they? I imagine your mother is quite proud of your achievements. The proudest, Hallie said firmly, not liking the undercurrents in this conversation, but unable to identify the specific threat. Well, I should let you both get back to networking, Amara said with another practiced smile. I'm sure we'll have chances to chat more this evening. Good luck with your presentation, dear. As Amara glided away toward a group of older women who welcomed her with air kisses and conspiratorial whispers, Kiki turned to her mother with a puzzled expression. That was weird, right? She seemed friendly, but something felt off. Some people in this world use politeness as a weapon, Hallie said, though she couldn't shake the feeling that Amara's interest in them had been more than casual curiosity. Don't let it distract you from why we're here. But as they continued moving through the crowd, Hallie became increasingly aware of being watched, studied, assessed by people who had no apparent reason to know who she was. The sensation made her skin crawl with the familiar paranoia that had kept her moving from apartment to apartment for years after Kiki's birth. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced over the sound system, "if you could please begin taking your seats, we're ready to begin this evening's presentations." The crowd began moving toward the seating area arranged in front of a small stage, and Keika took a deep breath that seemed to center her entire being. "This is it," she said, looking between the stage where she would soon speak and the audience full of people who could change her life forever. "Whatever happens after tonight, whatever opportunities come or don't come, I want you to know that getting here, being able to stand on that stage, it's already more than I ever dreamed possible." "I'm so proud of you," Hallie said, pulling her daughter close for a quick hug. "Not just for tonight, but for everything you've accomplished, everything you've overcome, everything you are." As Kiki moved toward the backstage area to prepare for her presentation, Hallie found a seat in the middle section of the ballroom, close enough to see her daughter clearly, but far enough back to hopefully avoid drawing attention to herself. But as the lights dimmed and the evening's program began, Hallie realized that anonymity was impossible in a room where she was probably the only person who didn't belong to the world of wealth and privilege that surrounded her. Somewhere in this audience, Chad Bauer was watching the same stage where his daughter would soon appear, completely unaware that the most important moment of his life was about to unfold in front of 500 strangers. The first 3 presentations were impressive, young entrepreneurs with innovative ideas and polished delivery, each one building anticipation for what would come next. But Hallie barely heard them, her attention divided between watching for Chad in the crowd and preparing herself emotionally for what would happen when Kiki took the stage. "Our final presenter this evening," the MC announced, "represents the kind of innovative thinking and social consciousness that defines the next generation of business leaders. Please welcome Kiki Bunbury, founder and CEO of Bunbury Consulting." The spotlight hit the stage, and Hallie's heart stopped as her daughter emerged from the wings, poised and confident and absolutely radiant in the moment she'd been working toward her entire young life. Somewhere in the audience, a man gasped audibly as if he'd been punched in the stomach, but Hallie was too focused on Kiki to identify the source of the sound. She had no idea that 20 rows behind her, Chad Bauer had just looked into the face of his daughter for the first time and felt his entire world shift on its axis. Chapter 6. Recognition and Shock. Chad Bauer had attended hundreds of business presentations over his career, but nothing had prepared him for the moment when Kiki Bunbury stepped into the spotlight and his entire world exploded into fragments. Time stopped. Every sound in the ballroom faded to white noise as Chad stared at the young woman on the stage, his heart hammering against his ribs with a force that made breathing impossible. She moved with his own unconscious confidence, the tilt of her head that was pure Hallie, the intelligent eyes that were unmistakably his own. She was his daughter, not possibly, not probably, but absolutely and undeniably his child, standing 20 feet away from him for the first time in her life, completely unaware that her father was watching her with 18 years of suppressed love threatening to tear him apart. "Good evening," Kiki began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's perfect acoustics. "My name is Kiki Bunbury, and I want to tell you about the difference between surviving and building something that lasts." Chad gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles went white. This was his daughter, brilliant and poised and magnificent, and he'd missed 18 years of her life. First steps and first words and every moment that mattered, all because he'd been too young and weak to fight for the family he'd unknowingly been abandoning. I grew up watching my mother work 3 jobs, Kiki continued, and Chad felt each word like a physical blow. I learned about business strategy from seeing her juggle schedules that would break most people, about perseverance from seeing her get up every morning and do whatever it took to provide opportunities she'd never had herself. The audience was completely silent, captivated by this young woman who spoke with the authority of someone who'd lived every truth she shared. But Chad could barely focus on her words because he was drowning in the magnitude of what he was seeing. She had his bone structure but Hallie's grace, his intensity but her mother's warmth. The confidence that came from the Boer bloodline tempered by the empathy that could only have been taught by someone who'd struggled and survived. My business exists because I saw other students like me, first-generation college kids who had revolutionary ideas but no roadmap for turning them into reality, Kiki said, advancing to a slide that showed impressive growth charts. We were smart enough to change the world, but we'd never been taught the language that people in rooms like this speak fluently. The presentation was flawless, passionate but professional, idealistic but grounded in solid business principles. She was a born leader, a natural entrepreneur, a force of nature disguised as an 18-year-old college student. She was perfect, and she was his, and he'd had nothing to do with creating the person she'd become. Success isn't just about profit margins, Kiki was saying, clicking to a slide that showed photographs of young entrepreneurs she'd helped launch their own companies. It's about impact, every client who breaks the cycle of poverty in their family, every voice that gets heard in rooms where it's never been welcome before. Chad found himself nodding unconsciously, recognizing his own evolving philosophy about corporate responsibility reflected in his daughter's words. But this wasn't something she'd inherited from him. This was something Hallie had taught her. The future of business isn't about maintaining existing power structures, Kiki continued, her voice ringing with conviction. It's about expanding those structures to include the brilliant minds we've been overlooking. It's about recognizing that the best ideas often come from people who've had to be creative just to survive. The words hit Chad like lightning because they sounded like conversations he'd had with Hallie 20 years ago. His daughter was carrying forward the same passion for justice that had made him fall in love with her mother. I'm seeking investment partners who understand that supporting underrepresented entrepreneurs isn't charity, it's smart business, Kiki said, advancing to her final slide. Because the markets we're serving are undervalued, not worthless. The communities we're empowering are underestimated, not incapable. The ballroom erupted in applause that went on for what felt like hours, with several audience members rising to their feet. Chad stood with them, clapping until his hands hurt, tears streaming down his face without regard for the 500 people who might notice his emotional breakdown. She was extraordinary, and she was his daughter, his flesh and blood, his legacy, his greatest achievement, even though he'd contributed nothing beyond DNA to her success. Chad? Amara's voice cut through his emotional haze, sharp with confusion. What's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost. Chad couldn't answer, couldn't look away from the stage where Kiki was acknowledging the applause with gracious confidence. But somewhere in his peripheral vision, he caught sight of a familiar profile in the audience, and his heart stopped. Hallie. She was sitting in the middle section, pride radiating from every line of her body as she watched their daughter accept recognition for achievements earned through merit rather than privilege. At 37, she was even more beautiful than Chad remembered. She was here. They were both here, the two most important people in his world, and he was frozen in his seat like a coward. As the applause died down and Kike prepared to leave the stage, Chad felt panic rising. This moment was ending, and once it was over, they would disappear back into their lives that had no room for him. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC announced, please join us in the Meridian Room for our networking reception. The crowd began moving toward the adjoining space, and Chad felt the weight of decision pressing down on him. In a few minutes he would be expected to mingle and network while his heart was breaking and healing simultaneously. "Chad, seriously, what is going on?" Amara demanded, grabbing his arm. "You look like you're about to collapse. And why were you crying during that girl's presentation?" Chad looked down at his fiancée and felt absolutely nothing. No connection, no affection, no desire to share the most important moment of his life with someone who would never understand its significance. "I need to speak with the presenters," Chad said, gently removing his arm from her grasp. "Particularly Ms. Bunbury." But Chad was already walking away, drawn toward the reception room where his daughter was probably surrounded by investors, where Hallie was probably watching protectively, where his family was waiting, whether they knew it or not. For 18 years, Chad had regretted the choice he'd made. For 18 years, he'd searched for the woman he'd loved and lost. For 18 years, he'd built an empire that felt hollow. Tonight, that was going to change. Tonight, he was finally going to find the courage to fight for what mattered most. Tonight, Chad Borger was going to meet his daughter and reclaim the love he should never have walked away from. Chapter 7. The Moment of Truth. The Meridian Room buzzed with opportunity and ambition as investors surrounded the evening's presenters, but Chad Borger moved through the crowd like a man in a trance, his eyes locked on the small group gathered around his daughter. Kiki stood at the center of an animated discussion about market strategies, her confidence growing with each brilliantly fielded question. She was in her element, intellectually stimulated, professionally recognized, completely unaware that her entire world was about to shift. Hallie hovered at the edge of the group, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough away to let Keke shine, independently. Chad could see the fierce pride in her posture, the way she monitored every interaction to protect their daughter from potential exploitation. She was protecting Kiki the same way she'd been protecting her for 18 years, vigilantly, courageously, completely alone. "Mr. Borger," Margaret Chen called out as Chad approached. "Wonderful event tonight. That last presenter, the Bunbury girl, she's quite impressive. Revolutionary thinking combined with solid fundamentals." "Yes," Chad managed, his voice rougher with emotion than he'd intended. "She's exceptional." "I'm thinking of making an offer," Margaret continued. "7-figure investment for 30%. What do you think?" The casual discussion of his daughter's future snapped Chad back to the present. These people saw Kike as an investment opportunity, not knowing they were talking about the most important person in his world. "I think any investor would be lucky to work with someone of her caliber," Chad said carefully. Before Margaret could respond, Amara appeared at his side with territorial efficiency. "Darling, there you are," she said smoothly. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Several people have asked about our engagement announcement." The reminder felt like a physical blow. Chad looked at Amara. Beautiful, accomplished, completely wrong for him, and felt the weight of choices made for all the wrong reasons. "Not now, Amara," he said quietly. "What do you mean, not now?" Her voice carried a sharp edge. "These are the most influential people in the state." "I said, not now." Chad's tone left no room for argument, but he was already moving again, drawn toward the group surrounding his daughter. He could hear Kika explaining her business model with passionate intensity. "The key is understanding that underserved communities aren't charity cases," Kiki was saying. "They're untapped markets with unique needs and enormous potential. Traditional business models fail because they're designed for demographics that already have access to resources." Chad found himself nodding, recognizing the same analytical thinking that had built his own empire. But more than that, he heard echoes of conversations he'd had with Hallie 20 years ago. "Ms. Bunbury," he said, stepping into the conversation circle, and the group immediately shifted to accommodate him with automatic deference. Kike looked up at him with polite attention, and Chad felt his breath catch as he met his daughter's eyes for the first time. They were his own eyes looking back at him, the same dark brown, the same intensity. "Mr. Borger," she said with professional courtesy, extending her hand. "Thank you so much for this opportunity. Your gala has exceeded every expectation." The contact was brief, but earth-shattering, the first time Chad had touched his daughter. "The opportunity is entirely ours," Chad said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Your presentation was extraordinary, the kind of vision that comes along once in a generation." "That's very kind," Kiki replied, blushing slightly, "though I have to give credit where it's due. Everything I know about business, about perseverance, about treating people with dignity, I learned from my mother." Chad's eyes automatically searched the crowd until they found Hallie, still standing at the periphery, watching this interaction with growing tension. When their gazes met across the room, 18 years collapsed into nothing. "Your mother," Chad said, returning his attention to Kiki, "sounds like a remarkable woman." "She is," Kiki said with fierce loyalty. "She gave up everything for me, her own dreams, her own opportunities, sometimes even meals, so I could have what I needed. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure those sacrifices weren't in vain." Each word hit Chad like a hammer blow, painting a picture of struggles he should have shared, sacrifices he should have prevented. "Ms. Bunbury," he said, his voice beginning to fracture, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course," Kiki replied, though something in his tone made her expression cautious. "How old are you?" "Exactly, I mean." The question seemed innocent, but Chad saw Hallie freeze in his peripheral vision, realizing that he was putting together pieces of a puzzle she'd hoped would remain scattered. "I'm 18, Kiki said, confused by his intensity. "I'll be 19 in April, April 15th. Chad's world tilted sideways. April 15th. Exactly 37 weeks after he'd left Hallie's dorm room. Exactly the right timeline. The conversations around them faded as Chad stared at his daughter. This brilliant young woman who'd inherited his strategic mind and Hallie's compassionate heart, who'd grown up believing her father hadn't wanted her. "Sir?" Kiki's voice seemed distant. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," Chad whispered, tears blurring his vision as 18 years of questions found their answer. "A miracle." The investor group was beginning to notice his unusual behavior, whispers starting as people tried to understand why their host was having a breakdown. But Chad couldn't see them, couldn't focus on anything except the young woman standing in front of him who represented everything he'd lost and hoped to find. "Kiki," he said, her name feeling sacred. "I need to tell you something. Something that's going to change everything you think you know." "What are you talking about?" Kiki asked, genuine concern in her voice as she looked between Chad's emotional face and her mother, who was now pushing through the crowd toward them with panic written across her features. Chad looked up to see Hallie approaching, her face pale with terror. Behind her, Amara watched with growing suspicion, other guests beginning to turn their attention toward the developing drama. In 30 seconds, Hallie would reach them. In 30 seconds, she would try to protect their daughter from a revelation that would shatter their world. In 30 seconds, Chad would lose his chance to finally claim the family he'd never known he'd abandoned. "Your birthday," Chad said urgently, his voice carrying clearly enough for nearby guests to hear. "April 15th, 18 years ago. That's exactly 37 weeks after I left your mother." Kiki's eyes widened as the implication hit her, mathematical certainty making her face go white. "You're my daughter, Kiki," Chad said, the words coming out like a prayer and confession. "I'm your father." The silence that followed was deafening, spreading outward until the entire reception room had fallen quiet. 500 people watching as a family that had never known it existed was finally, publicly, devastatingly reunited. Kiki stared at him in complete shock, her brilliant mind processing information that redefined everything she'd believed about herself. Behind her, Hallie had stopped moving, frozen like a deer in headlights. "What did you just say?" Kiki whispered. "I said I'm your father," Chad repeated, his voice carrying clearly through the room's perfect silence. "And I've spent 18 years searching for you and your mother, never knowing that the greatest love of my life had given me the greatest gift I could ever receive." The room erupted in chaos, cameras appearing, reporters pushing through the crowd, investors backing away from what was clearly becoming personal drama. But Chad only had eyes for his daughter, who was staring at him with tears streaming down her face and 18 years of questions written across her features. "Is it true?" she asked, turning toward Hallie, who had finally reached them and stood frozen with devastation and relief. "Baby," Hallie said, her voice breaking, "I can explain." "Is it true?" Kiki repeated, stronger now, demanding answers. Hallie looked between her daughter and the man who'd broken her heart, surrounded by 500 strangers about to turn their private pain into public entertainment. "Yes," she whispered, the word carrying clearly through the perfect silence. "It's true." And with that single word, 18 years of carefully guarded secrets exploded into the open, changing all three of their lives forever. In 30 seconds, Chad would lose his chance to finally claim the family he'd never known he'd abandoned. "Your birthday," Chad said urgently, his voice carrying clearly enough for nearby guests to hear. "April 15th, 18 years ago. That's exactly 37 weeks after I left your mother." Kiki's eyes widened as the implication hit her, mathematical certainty making her face go white with shock. "You're my daughter, Kiki," Chad said, the words coming out like a prayer and a confession and a declaration of war all at once. "I'm your father." The silence that followed was deafening, spreading outward from their small group like ripples on a pond, until the entire reception room had fallen quiet, 500 of the most powerful people in the state watching as a family that had never known it existed was finally, publicly, devastatingly reunited. Kike stared at him in complete shock, her brilliant mind processing information that redefined everything she'd ever believed about herself. Behind her, Hallie had stopped moving, frozen in place like a deer caught in headlights, watching her worst nightmare unfold in the most public way possible. "What did you just say?" Kiki whispered, her voice barely audible in the sudden silence. "I said I'm your father," Chad repeated, his voice carrying clearly through the acoustic perfection of the reception room. "And I've spent 18 years searching for you and your mother, never knowing that the greatest love of my life had given me the greatest gift I could ever receive." The room erupted in chaos, cameras appearing from nowhere, reporters pushing through the crowd, investors backing away from what was clearly becoming a personal drama rather than a business networking opportunity. But Chad only had eyes for his daughter, who was staring at him with tears streaming down her face and 18 years of questions written across her features. "Is it true?" she asked, turning toward Hallie, who had finally reached them and was standing frozen with devastation and something that might have been relief written across her face. "Baby," Hallie said, her voice breaking on the word. "I can explain." "Is it true?" Kiki repeated, her voice stronger now, demanding answers that would reshape her entire understanding of who she was and where she'd come from. Hallie looked between her daughter and the man who'd broken her heart 18 years ago, surrounded by 500 strangers who were about to turn their private pain into public entertainment. "Yes," she whispered, the word carrying clearly through the room's perfect silence. "It's true." And with that single word, 18 years of carefully guarded secrets exploded into the open, changing all three of their lives forever, in the most devastating and miraculous way possible. Chapter 8. The Public Revelation. The aftermath of truth was uglier than Hallie had ever imagined it could be. Camera flashes exploded around them like lightning strikes as reporters materialized from nowhere. Smartphones appeared in hundreds of hands, and the elegant networking reception transformed into a feeding frenzy of journalists who'd stumbled upon the story of the year. Billionaire CEO discovers secret daughter at his own charity gala. Ms. Bunbury, can you comment on why you kept Mr. Boer's daughter secret for 18 years? Mr. Boer, how does it feel to discover you have a child? Kike, did you know who your father was when you applied to speak tonight? The questions came from all directions, sharp and invasive, and designed to elicit emotional responses that would make better headlines. Kiki stood frozen in the center of the chaos, her face pale with shock as she processed the fact that her entire life story had just been rewritten in front of 500 strangers. "Get away from her!" Hallie said fiercely, stepping in front of her daughter like a shield, her maternal instincts overriding every other consideration. "She doesn't owe you any explanations." But the reporters pressed closer, sensing blood in the water, their questions becoming more aggressive and personal with each passing second. Was this reunion planned for publicity purposes? Ms. Bunbury, what financial support are you seeking from Mr. Boer? Is this why Kiki was selected to speak tonight? Family connections rather than merit? The last question hit like a physical blow, and Hallie watched her daughter's face crumple as the achievement she'd worked so hard for was instantly reframed as nepotism and favoritism. "That's enough," Chad said, his voice cutting through the chaos with the authority of someone accustomed to controlling rooms full of powerful people. "Security, please escort the media to the designated press area. This is a private family matter." But it was too late for privacy. The damage was done, captured on dozens of cameras and already being uploaded to social media platforms where it would live forever, turning their most vulnerable moment into entertainment for strangers who had no stake in their pain. "I need to get out of here," Keki said suddenly, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I need air. I need space. I need to think." She pushed through the crowd of gawking guests and persistent reporters, moving toward the exit with the kind of focused determination that brooked no interference. Hallie started to follow, but Chad caught her arm gently. "Let me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Please, let me go after her. You've done enough," Hallie snapped, 18 years of suppressed fury finally finding its target. "You had no right to do that to her, to us, in front of all these people." "I know," Chad said, his face etched with regret and desperation. "I know, and I'm sorry. But I couldn't let her walk away without knowing the truth. I couldn't lose her again." "You never had her to lose," Hallie said coldly, pulling her arm free. "And now you've destroyed the one thing that mattered most to her, her belief that she earned her success through her own merit." The accusation hit Chad like a slap, but before he could respond, Hallie was pushing through the crowd after her daughter, leaving him standing alone in the wreckage of the evening that was supposed to have been Keki's triumph. "Well," Amara's voice cut through his emotional haze like a blade, "that was quite a performance. I had no idea you were such a gifted actor." Chad turned to find his fiancée watching him with cold calculation, her perfectly composed expression betraying nothing of whatever thoughts were racing behind her eyes. "This isn't a performance, Amara," Chad said quietly. "That young woman is my daughter. The woman who just left is someone I was in love with 18 years ago." "How convenient," Amara said with surgical precision, "that they should both appear in your life just as our engagement is being announced. Some might say the timing is suspicious." The implication that Hallie and Keke were somehow orchestrating this reunion for financial gain made Chad's vision go red with fury. "Don't," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Don't you dare suggest that they're anything other than exactly who they appear to be. That woman raised my child alone for 18 years while I built an empire. That girl earned every opportunity she's received through her own brilliance and hard work. And yet, here we are, Amara continued smoothly, with your newfound family drama playing out in front of every major investor and media outlet in the state. If this was a publicity stunt, it couldn't have been orchestrated more perfectly. Chad stared at the woman he'd been planning to marry, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Beautiful, accomplished, utterly lacking in empathy or understanding of anything that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. "We're done," he said simply. "The engagement, the wedding plans, whatever future you thought we were building together, it's over." Amara's composure finally cracked, revealing the calculating ambition that had always lurked beneath her polished exterior. "You're making a mistake, Chad, a very expensive mistake. My family's connections, our social positioning, the business opportunities we represent together. You're throwing all of that away for what? A woman who kept your child secret for 18 years and a girl who may or may not actually be yours?" "She's mine," Chad said, with absolute certainty. "And even if she wasn't, even if this was all some elaborate deception, it would still be worth more than anything you and I could ever build together." He turned away from Amara's shocked face and pushed through the crowd, desperate to find Kike and Hallie before they disappeared from his life again. Behind him, he could hear the whispered conversations of guests who were already turning the evening's revelation into gossip that would fuel social media speculation for weeks. Chad found them in the hotel lobby, Keiki sitting on a marble bench with her head in her hands, while Hallie paced nearby with the restless energy of a protective mother who couldn't fix what was broken. "Keiki," Chad said softly, approaching carefully as if she were a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. She looked up at him with eyes that were red from crying, but blazed with intelligence and hurt, and 18 years of questions that demanded answers. "Why now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Why did you have to tell everyone like that? Why couldn't you have found a private way to—" "Because I was afraid," Chad admitted, sinking onto the bench beside her with his own composure finally cracking completely. "I was afraid that if I didn't claim you publicly, immediately, you'd disappear from my life the way your mother did 18 years ago. I was afraid that you'd reject me, that you'd decide I didn't deserve to know you, that you'd choose to keep me out of your life the way I'd been kept out of it before I even knew you existed. But now everyone thinks I got this opportunity because of family connections," Keiki said, her voice breaking on the words that represented her worst fear. "Everything I've accomplished, everything I've worked for, it's all tainted now. People will always wonder if I really earned my success, or if I just had a billionaire father pulling strings behind the scenes." The pain in her voice was devastating, and Chad realized that his desperate need to claim his daughter had destroyed the very thing she valued most: her independence, her self-made success, her belief that she'd earned her place in the world through merit rather than privilege. "I'm sorry," he said, the words completely inadequate for the magnitude of what he'd done. "I'm so sorry, Kiki. I never thought, I didn't consider how the revelation would affect your achievements. I saw you on that stage, and I realized you were my daughter, and I couldn't contain the joy and the pride and the love I felt. I wanted the whole world to know that you were mine. But I'm not yours," Keiki said quietly, looking between her parents with dawning understanding of the complexity of her situation. "I'm hers. She's the one who raised me, who sacrificed for me, who was there for every important moment of my life. You're a stranger who happens to share my DNA." The words were brutal but true, and Chad felt them like knife wounds to his heart. "You're right," he said simply. "You're absolutely right. I haven't earned the right to call you mine. But I'd like the chance to try. I'd like the opportunity to be the father you deserve to have all along." "What if I don't want that?" Kike asked, her voice small but firm. "What if I'm happy with the family I have? What if bringing you into our lives just complicates everything and makes it worse?" Chad looked at this brilliant young woman who'd been shaped entirely by Hallie's love and strength, who had every right to reject the father who'd been absent for her entire life, and felt his heart break with the possibility that he might have found his family only to lose them again. "Then I'll respect that," he said quietly. "If that's what you decide, I'll stay out of your life, but I'll also spend the rest of my life making sure you have every opportunity, every advantage, every support you need to build the future you want, whether I'm part of it or not." "We don't need your money," Hallie said sharply, speaking for the first time since they'd left the reception. "We've managed fine without it for 18 years. "Have you?" Chad asked gently, looking at the woman he'd never stopped loving. "Have you really been fine working 3 jobs just to keep food on the table? Have you been fine raising our daughter alone, never getting to pursue your own dreams because you were too busy making sure she could pursue hers?" The questions hung in the air between them, highlighting 18 years of struggles that could have been avoided, sacrifices that shouldn't have been necessary, dreams that had been deferred indefinitely in service of survival. "That's not the point," Hallie said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The point is that we built something together, she and I, something real and strong and honest. We don't need you to swoop in and fix our lives now." "I'm not trying to fix your lives," Chad said desperately. "I'm trying to become part of them. I'm trying to earn the right to love both of you the way I should have been loving you all along." The hotel lobby fell silent, except for the distant sounds of the gala continuing without them. 500 people probably still discussing the evening's unexpected revelation, while the 3 people at its center tried to figure out how to move forward from this moment. "I need time," Keke said finally, standing up with the kind of decisive movement that suggested she'd reached some internal conclusion. "I need time to process all of this, to figure out what it means, to decide what I want our relationship to look like going forward." "How much time?" Chad asked, afraid of the answer but needing to know. "I don't know," Kiki said honestly. "Maybe a lot, maybe forever. I'm 18 years old and I just found out that everything I believed about my identity was based on incomplete information. That's not something I can just absorb overnight." Chad nodded, understanding that he had no right to demand anything from either of them after 18 years of absence. "Whatever you need, however long it takes, I'll be here when you're ready." "Will you?" Kiki asked, her voice carrying a note of challenge that reminded Chad powerfully of himself at that age. "Or will you disappear again when things get complicated or difficult or inconvenient?" The question hit like a physical blow, forcing Chad to confront the possibility that his daughter might never trust him, might never believe that he wouldn't abandon her again when circumstances demanded it. "I'll be here," he said with absolute conviction. "For the rest of my life, for whatever role you're willing to let me have in it, I'll be here. That's a promise I intend to keep, no matter what." As they left the hotel together, awkwardly, separately, but somehow still connected by invisible threads of blood and possibility, Chad watched his daughter and the woman he'd never stopped loving disappear into the night, carrying with them his heart and his hope for a future he'd never dared to imagine. Behind them, the gala continued without its host, investors and socialites dissecting the evening's drama with the kind of fascinated horror that would fuel gossip columns for months. Phones buzzed with notifications as the story spread across social media platforms, complete with grainy photos and breathless speculation about secret families and hidden motives. Billionaire CEO's secret love child revealed at charity gala would be trending within the hour. But Chad barely noticed the chaos they'd left behind. His entire focus was on the question that would determine the rest of his life. Would love be strong enough to bridge 18 years of absence, or had he destroyed his only chance at family by claiming it too publicly, too desperately, too late? As Hallie and Kike climbed into a taxi that would take them back to their small apartment and their complicated new reality, neither woman could have predicted that this devastating public revelation would eventually become the foundation for something beautiful, a family that would choose each other not because of obligation or blood, but because love, however imperfect, was worth fighting for. The long journey toward forgiveness and healing was about to begin, and it would test all three of them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But sometimes the most beautiful things grew from the ashes of what seemed like complete destruction. Sometimes love really could conquer everything, even the mistakes that seemed too big to forgive, even the secrets that had defined entire lives, even the pain that felt too deep to heal. Tonight had ended one story and begun another. The only question was whether they would all be brave enough to write a better ending than the one that had kept them apart for so long. In the taxi's dim interior, Keke reached for her mother's hand, and for the first time since the revelation, Hallie felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, their family wasn't ending. Maybe it was finally beginning. Chapter 9. When Everything Falls Apart. 3 weeks after the gala, Hallie Bunbury sat in her car outside the unemployment office, staring at the eviction notice that had been taped to their apartment door that morning alongside a stack of tabloid newspapers with headlines that made her stomach turn. Gold digger's 18-year secret exposed, billionaire's baby mama breaks silence, nepotism scandal rocks investment world. The media attention had been relentless and cruel, turning their private pain into public entertainment for strangers who felt entitled to judge choices they couldn't possibly understand. Reporters had tracked down their address, called Hallie's employers, even approached Keke's professors looking for quotes about the scandal that had destroyed the quiet life they'd built together. The unemployment benefits wouldn't cover their rent, and Hallie's emergency fund had been depleted weeks ago when Morrison's diner fired her for bringing unwanted attention to the establishment. The cleaning company had followed suit, citing client concerns about discretion, and the tutoring program had reluctantly let her go to avoid controversy that might affect their funding. In 3 weeks, Hallie had lost everything she'd built over 18 years of careful work. All because Chad Boyer couldn't control his emotions long enough to consider the consequences of his public revelation. Her phone buzzed with another unknown number, probably another reporter trying to get an exclusive interview about the woman who kept a billionaire's child secret. She'd stopped answering calls from numbers she didn't recognize after the first week, when a particularly aggressive journalist had pretended to be calling about job opportunities just to get her to talk. The irony wasn't lost on her that 18 years of protecting Kike from Chad's world had been undone in a single moment when he'd decided to claim them publicly without considering what that exposure would cost. When Hallie finally made it home to their apartment, soon to be former apartment if she couldn't figure out how to pay rent, she found Keke sitting at their kitchen table surrounded by printed emails and what looked like contract termination letters. "How bad is it?" Hallie asked, though she could tell from her daughter's expression that the news wouldn't be good. "3 clients have cancelled their contracts," Keke said without looking up from the papers scattered around her laptop. 2 others are assessing their needs, which is corporate speak for, "We're dumping you as soon as we can find a legal way to do it. My business insurance company is threatening to drop coverage because they consider the media attention a liability risk." Hallie sank into the chair across from her daughter, feeling the weight of 18 years of careful planning and sacrifice crumbling around them. "Baby, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. I should have told you about Chad years ago, should have prepared you for the possibility that he might—" "This isn't your fault," Keke interrupted sharply. "This is his fault. He's the one who decided to turn our private family business into a public spectacle. He's the one who couldn't wait for a private conversation before announcing to 500 strangers that I was his daughter." The bitterness in Keke's voice was devastating to hear. 3 weeks ago, she'd been riding high on the success of her presentation and the investment opportunities it had generated. Now she was watching her business collapse under the weight of speculation about whether her achievements were legitimate or the result of undisclosed family connections. "Have you heard from him?" Hallie asked carefully, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Every day," Keiki said with a bitter laugh. "Flowers, cards, emails, text messages, even a singing telegram that was so embarrassing I wanted to disappear into the floor. He keeps saying he wants to make things right and support us through this difficult time, as if throwing money at the problem will somehow undo the damage he caused." Hallie felt a familiar flash of the anger that had sustained her through 18 years of single parenthood. Chad Bauer, with his wealth and privilege and resources, thought he could fix anything with his checkbook. He had no idea what it was like to build something from nothing, to earn respect through merit rather than connections, to have your accomplishments questioned because of circumstances beyond your control. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I haven't responded to any of his attempts to contact me." Kiki's voice was flat, emotionless in a way that worried Hallie more than tears would have. "I don't want his money, and I don't want his guilt. I want my life back the way it was, before he decided to play father in front of a room full of cameras." A sharp knock at their door interrupted the conversation, and both women tensed. Reporters had been showing up unannounced for weeks, trying to catch them off guard with invasive questions about their relationship with Chad and their plans for the future. But when Hallie opened the door, she found Celine Thatcher standing in the hallway with a bottle of wine and the expression of someone prepared for war. "Move over," Celine said, pushing past Hallie into the apartment. "We're having an intervention." "Celine, this really isn't a good time," Hallie started, but her best friend was already settling herself at the kitchen table across from Keke. "Actually, it's the perfect time," Celine said, uncorking the wine with practiced efficiency. "You two have been wallowing in misery for 3 weeks while your lives fall apart around you. It's time for some tough love." Kiki looked up from her laptop with the first genuine emotion Hallie had seen from her in days. "Aunt Celine, you don't understand what we're dealing with. The media attention, the business consequences, the way people look at us now." "I understand that you're both too proud and too stubborn to accept help when you need it," Celine interrupted, pouring wine into 3 mismatched glasses. "I understand that you're letting hurt feelings and wounded pride override common sense and practical reality." She turned to Hallie first, her expression stern but loving. "You've lost your jobs because of media attention that will eventually die down. You're facing eviction because you're too proud to accept financial help from the father of your child. And you're losing your daughter because you're so busy feeling guilty about past decisions that you can't focus on making better ones now." "It's not that simple," Hallie protested, but Celine held up a hand. "It is exactly that simple. Chad Bauer owes you 18 years of child support plus interest. He owes Kiki a college fund and a relationship and all the support he should have been providing since the day she was born. This isn't charity, it's responsibility. It's him finally paying bills that should have been paid all along." She turned to Kiki, her voice gentling but losing none of its directness. "And you, sweetheart, are punishing yourself and your mother for something that isn't either of your faults. Yes, the public revelation was handled badly. Yes, it's complicated your business relationships, but you're still the same brilliant young woman who built a 6-figure company before she could legally drink. That hasn't changed just because people now know who your father is." "But they'll always wonder if I earned my success or if I had help," Keiki said, her voice cracking with 18 years of suppressed insecurity. "Every achievement, every opportunity, every success will be questioned. People will assume I had advantages I didn't actually have." "Let them wonder," Celine said fiercely. "Successful women have been dealing with speculation about whether they earned their achievements for centuries. You prove them wrong by continuing to be excellent, not by hiding from opportunities because someone might question whether you deserve them." What about the media attention? The way people are treating us like we're celebrities instead of real people with real problems. We'll pass, Celine said pragmatically. There'll be another scandal next week, another family drama for people to dissect and judge. But your business skills, your intelligence, your ability to solve problems that other people can't even see, those are permanent. Those will still be there when the tabloids have moved on to whatever shiny new story catches their attention. Halle found herself nodding despite her resistance to Celine's pragmatic advice. But what if accepting his help changes the dynamic between us? What if it makes us dependent on him in ways that aren't healthy? Then you set boundaries, Celine said simply. You accept the financial support you and Keiki deserve while maintaining your independence and self-respect. You let him earn his place in your lives slowly, on your terms, instead of cutting him off completely because he handled one moment badly. One moment? Keiki's voice was sharp with renewed anger. He destroyed my reputation and exposed our private business to the entire world. That's not just handling one moment badly. You're right, Celine agreed calmly. It was a massive mistake that showed terrible judgment and caused real damage. But people make mistakes, sweetheart. Even people who love us deeply sometimes make choices that hurt us. The question is whether you're going to let one terrible decision erase the possibility of building something good from a complicated situation. The three women sat in silence for several minutes, sipping wine and contemplating the wreckage of their carefully constructed world. Outside their window, the city hummed with its usual indifference, unaware that in this small apartment, a family was trying to figure out how to survive the collision of past and present. I'm scared, Halle admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared that if I let him back into our lives, he'll take Keiki away from me, that she'll choose his world over the life we built together. I'm scared too, Keiki said, reaching across the table to take her mother's hand for the first time in weeks. I'm scared that if I forgive him for the public humiliation, I'm setting myself up to be disappointed again, and I'm scared that if I don't forgive him, I'll always wonder what could have been. Celine smiled, the first genuine expression of hope any of them had worn in weeks. Being scared means you're paying attention to what matters. The question is whether you're going to let fear keep you stuck in this mess, or whether you're going to use it as motivation to build something better. What if we reach out to him and he disappoints us again? Kike asked quietly. What if he's only interested in playing father now because the secret is out and he loses interest when the novelty wears off? Then you'll handle it the same way you've handled every other disappointment in your life, Celine said firmly. Together, with dignity, and with the knowledge that you gave love a chance to grow instead of letting fear kill it before it could even begin. As the evening wore on and the wine bottle emptied, three women who loved each other began the delicate process of figuring out how to move forward. There were no easy answers, no simple solutions to 18 years of complicated history. But for the first time since the gala, Halle and Keiki began to remember that they were stronger together than apart, and that love, even complicated, imperfect love, was worth the risk of being hurt. So, what do we do? Halle asked, as they prepared to clean up the remnants of their emotional intervention. We call him, Keiki said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. We set up a meeting on our terms, in a private place where we can have an honest conversation without cameras or reporters or strangers watching our every move. And then we see if the man who created this mess is capable of helping us build something better from the wreckage, Keiki said, with a maturity that made Halle's heart ache with pride. And if he's not, at least we'll know we tried. As they made plans for a conversation that would determine the future of their family, none of them could have imagined how much courage it would take to rebuild trust that had been shattered so publicly, or how much love would be required to heal wounds that had been opened for the world to see. But for the first time in 3 weeks, hope felt possible again. And sometimes hope was enough to begin the long journey back to each other. Chapter 10. When Hearts Remember Love. Few weeks later, Hallie Bunbury stood in the kitchen of the house Chad had bought for them, a warm 3-bedroom home with a garden where she could grow vegetables and a front porch where they could sit together in the evenings, and marveled at how quietly happiness could return to a life that had seemed irreparably broken. The morning sun streamed through windows without security bars, illuminating a space that finally felt like home. Keke sat at the breakfast table reviewing quarterly reports from her consulting business, which had not only survived the media scandal but emerged stronger. The Williams Foundation wants to extend their contract for another 2 years, Kiki said, looking up with satisfaction. Turns out, surviving public scrutiny and rebuilding your reputation is exactly what non-profit organizations value in a consultant. I'm proud of you, baby, Hallie said, pouring coffee into matching mugs. The way you turned that nightmare into credibility takes real strength. I learned from the best, Kiki said warmly. How's the new position treating you? Challenging in all the best ways, Hallie admitted. Developing community outreach programs for the foundation is everything I hoped business school would lead to, just 18 years later. The job at the Borger Foundation had been offered with no pressure, and after months of rebuilding trust, Hallie had accepted the position that allowed meaningful work while maintaining independence. He's been good to us, Kiki said quietly. Even when we were angry and suspicious, he never stopped trying to earn our forgiveness. Chad's patience during their healing had been extraordinary, respecting their need for space, supporting them without conditions, slowly building genuine connections. The front door opened with Chad's familiar key. He appeared wearing casual clothes instead of expensive suits. "Good morning, beautiful women," he said warmly. "How are my favorite people today?" "Caffeinated and ready to tackle the world," Kiki grinned, accepting his morning kiss on her forehead. "Ready for the board meeting?" Chad's expression grew thoughtful. "Today we find out if the transition plan gets approved." For months, Chad had been restructuring Borger Industries, transitioning from CEO to chairman to focus on foundation work and be present for his family. "Whatever the board decides, we'll handle it together," Hallie said, reaching for his hand. "That's what families do." The word still felt miraculous. Family. After 18 years believing she and Kiki were complete, Chad's inclusion had been both terrifying and wonderful. "There's something I want to discuss," Chad said carefully, pulling out a small velvet box, "something I've been thinking about for weeks." Kiki and Hallie exchanged a look about boundaries and the delicate balance they'd achieved. 18 years ago, he said quietly, I bought this ring for a 19-year-old girl who made me believe in love and second chances. Hallie's breath caught recognizing the ring, simple and elegant, exactly what she'd always wanted. "I've carried it every day since, hoping someday I'd get the chance to give it to you properly." He knelt beside Hallie's chair, while Kiki watched with tears streaming. "I know I have no right to ask anything. I missed 18 years of loving you both the way you deserved, but I also know love doesn't die just because circumstances try to kill it. What we had was real, and what we're building now is stronger because it's based on truth." "What are you asking?" Hallie whispered. "I'm asking you to marry me, Hallie Bunbury," Chad said, opening the ring box. "I'm asking to be the partner I should have been from the beginning. And I'm asking you, Kiki, to let me adopt you officially, to give you the family name you should have had, to make us a real family in every way." The kitchen fell silent, except for Kiki's crying and the clocks ticking. "I don't know if I'm ready," Hallie said honestly. "I don't know if I can trust this won't fall apart when things get difficult." "Then we'll take it one day at a time," Chad said gently. "One conversation, one decision, one moment of choosing each other over fear." Hallie looked at this man who had broken her heart, then spent months putting it back together. who had proved worthy of being called father. "What do you think, baby?" Hallie asked Kiki. "Are you ready for us to be officially a family?" "I've been ready since he spent 6 months earning our trust instead of demanding it," Kiki said through tears. "Having a father doesn't diminish what you and I built. It makes our family bigger and stronger." "Yes," Hallie whispered, then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you." Chad slipped the ring on with reverent care. It fit perfectly, just as it had 18 years ago. "And yes," Kiki said, launching into a group hug, "I want to be Kiki Boa. I want us to be a real family." They held each other in their kitchen, surrounded by infinite possibilities of their shared future. "I love you both so much," Chad said. "I love the family we're building." "I love you too," Hallie said, the words feeling both foreign and familiar. "I love who you've become." "And I love having a dad," Kike laughed, even if he announced it in the most embarrassing way possible. "So when do we do this?" Hallie asked, admiring her ring. "The wedding and adoption?" "Whenever you want," Chad said. "I'm not going anywhere ever again." "Small ceremony," Keke said decisively. "Just us and Aunt Celine and close friends. Nothing for social media." They spent the morning making plans, talking about the wedding they wanted and family traditions they hoped to create. As the sun climbed higher, they moved to their front porch to watch their neighborhood come alive. "Thank you," Chad said as they settled into the porch swing, "for giving me a second chance." "Thank you for not giving up," Hallie replied, settling against his side, "for fighting for us even when we were too hurt to fight for ourselves." Chad pulled out another envelope. "One more surprise, something I've been working on for months." Hallie opened it to find legal documents establishing the Bunbury Family Foundation, focused on supporting first-generation college students.